we go now with the conclusions to Mr. Willy Fautré, Director and co-founder of Human Rights Without Frontiers. Willy was an active advocate for human rights in communist countries during the Cold War. He has extensive experience in freedom of religion or belief around the world. He is a member of the International Consortium on Law and Religious Studies. He has written many articles in university journals, held lectures in academic conferences, testified before interstate organizations, and given interviews to international media. Since Human Rights Without Frontier was created, the executive director has been Willy Fautré, a long-standing human rights activist. Human Rights Without Frontier International conducts research, field missions, analysis and monitoring of a wide range of human rights concerns around the world. An international network of correspondents provides this NGO with first-hand information, and we are sure that also now Willy will bring us important insights and conclusion on this webinar. Please, Willy, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Camelia, for this kind introduction. Remembering and commemorating a traumatic event which made history is important for any social group, whether it is a nation, an ethnic group, or a religious or spiritual community. It is important for the generation who experience such an event, but it is also important for the next generation because it forges the transgenerational collective identity of the group while strengthening this identity at the individual level. The 19 December 96 pogrom is such a traumatic event. It was the starting point of a series of physical persecution targeting Dr. Hong and a number of disease who were arbitrarily arrested, deprived of their freedom and freedom of movement, and imprisoned for days, weeks, or months. They were all innocent, and they were all acquitted of the spurious charges they were accused of. But at that time, there were other victims, those who were illegally arrested and their loved ones lost their jobs. Their children were mocked at school. The psychological and social damage was incommensurable. Moreover, the slanders and defamation in the media targeting Taiji Man and Dr. Hong deeply saddened all the disease. You heard their testimonies and felt their grief in their psyche and in their flesh. But persecution does not always show a face of brutality. It can be insidious, like a poison, as Peter Zurrer just explained you with the case of the Church of Unification. But its purpose always remains the same everywhere. It is to destroy and to kill. One of those poisons used by the persecutors of Taiji Men in Taiwan is the never-ending harassment by the tax administration, 24 years, for the purpose of stifling it financially to death. This form of persecution is not spectacular and can remain invisible to outsiders who might be in a position to help. But like any poison, its purpose is to remain invisible, to scare away anybody who might decide to help its victim and to avoid the threat of an antidote. That antidote being defenders from outside as all the panelists are here today. For 24 years, the body of Taiji Man has only relied on itself and has mobilized all its cells to fight against that poison, the tax administration. Taiji Man has been largely successful in its resistance and its fight against the tax administration. But with the auction of some of its properties, it has temporarily lost a part of its integrity and its capacity. The war waged by those who wanted the death of Taiji Man was comprised of several weapons usually used by anti-cult movements. First, to fabricate a case. Second, to find alleged victims of Taiji Man. And third, to spread fake news in the media. Let's start with the first point, fabricated case. A common technique used by anti-cult organizations is to accuse a group of its leader of violating the law. Sexual abuse, exploitation of members, abuse of weakness, money laundering, criminal activities are attractive issues for the judiciary and the media. It usually takes years, if not 1 or 2 decades, and a lot of money for court expenses to be cleared of such fake charges. This can easily exhaust the mental and financial forces of a small and vulnerable group. In the case of Taiji Man, the fabricated accusation was tax fraud. Marco Ferraresi explained how a taxation system can be an instrument of persecution against a specific target and be particularly effective to this end. Tax fraud was the ideal accusation to damage Taiji Man, which claims to abide by strict ethical rules in this regard. But for Prosecutor Ho, this was not enough. He stubbornly looked for a possible loophole in the previous judicial cases that he had lost to fabricate a new one. The second point, the second weapon used was fake victims. There is always a natural feeling of sympathy towards victims in general. And anti-cult organizations are used to manipulating this argument in the media, whether it's true or false. As Alessandra Meacarelli from the European Federations for Freedom of Belief said, the persecution of Taiji Man was largely masterminded by a single magistrate, Prosecutor Hu, who based his accusations against Taiji Man in court on the testimonies of alleged victims of Taiji Man. But, as he pointed out, it was a state institution, the Control Yuan, which found out during a hearing that the Victims Association was fundamentally false after the so-called victims themselves retracted during a hearing. And the last point is the manipulation of fake news. Again, anti-cult organizations know that shocking news easily make their way to the headlines in the media. Prosecutor Hu used the well-known fake news technique with Taiji Man to destroy its image, as Massimo Introvigne from Cesnur described in his presentation. Prosecutor Hu accused Hong in the media of raising goblins, which in Chinese folklore and movies means evoking a spirit who would then serve to perform evil deeds. Massimo Introvigne deconstructed this ridiculous accusation, stressing that raising goblins is something totally foreign to Taiji Man's practices. And I come to the conclusion. First, Taiji Man needs to be praised for having remained strong and united, for not wanting a friendly settlement as it would have meant to recognize an infringement of the tax law and to declare that something was made contrary to the founding principles of their movement, which ultimately would have given the victory to the prosecutors. Persecution by a tax administration is not easy to sell, if I can use that word, to institutions and NGOs defending human rights, because there is no visible physical violence and no blood to show. But we at Human Rights Without Frontiers are familiar with that sort of persecution against religious groups in Russia, France, and other countries. The persecution masterminded by a prosecutor who has caused a lot of damage, morally and financially. Taijimen has survived, but what mainly matters now is its image, which has been disfigured during 24 years. One way for Taijimen of restoring its honor and its image in Taiwan is to have its past, current, and future achievements assessed by neutral third parties outside Taiwan, like scholars, lawyers, and human rights organizations. Written publications, but also video testimonies like we saw today, can greatly contribute to it. Last but not least, media outlets and actors in Taiwan are also a primary target because they shape the perceptions of public opinion, politicians, and state institutions. Mapping the negative and fake news about Taijimen in Taiwan is therefore a priority, but only a first step. The second step should be a constructive report based on research and analysis of the news distorting the Taijimen realities, re-establishing the real facts versus the myth. And the last step should be the publication of this report in English and in Chinese, to be followed by a targeted communication campaign meant to reaffirm the truth about Taijimen. My last words will be words of thanks for Camelia Marin, Marco Respinti contribution to this webinar, but also to the disease who testified, courageously testified about what they had experienced during 24 years of persecution of Taijimen, and also all those who invisibly behind the scenes contributed to the preparation and this webinar today. Thank you very much for your attention.